Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give a moment for all the attendees to sort of trickle in. Hello, everyone. I'm just again, we're waiting for some folks to just come into the chat before we get started. Just give it a little moment. Oh, did we lose Brendan? All right. Well, I think we'll just start getting started now. And we'll kind of welcome everybody in and we'll go from there. So welcome, everyone. My name is Savannah Kosteniuk. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a graduate student at the University of British Columbia and a media editor with Transforming Anthropology, the journal for the Association of Black Anthropologists. As some of you may know, Transforming Anthropology published a special issue to mark the 25th anniversary of Dr. Lee D. Baker's classic book, From Savage to Negro. As part of that issue, Dr. Baker's colleagues, previous and current students contributed reflections responding to the significance of Dr. Baker's book, scholarship, and mentorship. We are fortunate to have most of those contributors here with us today to celebrate and create an intentional space for intergenerational conversation. From Savage to Negro, initially published in 1998, presents an important intervention that historicizes the discipline of anthropology and integrates that history with African-American intellectual and political history. Meticulously tracing the relationships between individuals, institutions, and the wider socio-political context, Dr. Baker demonstrates that there was a complementary relationship between the formation of anthropology as a discipline and the construction of race. Before we go any further, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge that we are all gathering virtually today. Some of us are in person at Duke University, which is great. Most of y'all are in the same room with different screens, but we are all situated on the lands of various Indigenous nations. I'm joining from the territory of the Syilx Nation in the Okanagan Valley in so-called Canada. And I would invite folks to share your location or where you're joining from in the chat if you feel comfortable to do so. And while today is a celebration, I also want to affirm solidarity with Black and Indigenous folks from Palestine to Congo to Sudan who are resisting forces of white supremacy and fighting to be free. It is such an honor to be here with you all today. And it's a special privilege to introduce our panelists. Yeah, it's a great honor to be with all of you. So I'll begin with Bianca C. Williams. Bianca C. Williams is the Endowed Chair in Race, Racism, and Racial Justice, and Matthew D. Branch Associate Professor of Africana Studies and Anthropology at Bowdoin College. Her desire to answer the question, how do Black women develop strategies for enduring and resisting the effects of racism and sexism while maintaining emotional wellness, has motivated her lifelong exploration of race, gender, and emotion in higher education and organizing communities. Williams is the author of the award-winning book, The Pursuit of Happiness, Black Women, Diasporic Dreams, and the Politics of Emotional Transnationalism, and co-editor of the volume Plantation Politics and Campus Rebellions, Power, Diversity, and the Emancipatory Struggle in Higher Education. Bertin M. Louis, Jr. is Associate Professor of Anthropology and African American and Africana Studies at the University of Kentucky. He is the winner of the 2023 Sam Duvall Memorial Award for Anti-Colonialism and Racial Justice in Anthropology from the American Anthropological Association, and the winner of the 2023-2024 Wenner Grand Fellowship in Anthropology and Black Experiences. He served as the president of the Association of Black Anthropologists, 2021 to 2023, and is the current ABA Secretary Treasurer. Dr. Louis is also the co-author of the forthcoming book, Conditionally Accepted, Navigating Higher Education from the Margins, which we have copies of today. Or, sorry, you have a copy of this book, which is really exciting. So congratulations on that. Dr. Louis studies the growth of Protestant forms of Christianity among Haitians transnationally, which is featured in his New York University Press book, My Soul is in Haiti, Protestantism in the Haitian Diaspora of the Bahamas, which was a finalist for the 2015 Haitian Studies Association Book Prize in the Social Sciences. Dr. Tracie Canada is a sociocultural anthropologist whose ethnographic research uses sport to theorize race, kinship and care, gender, and the performing body. Her work focuses on the lived experiences of Black football players. Currently, she is assistant professor in the Department of Cultural Anthropology and affiliated with the Sports and Race Project at Duke University. Her research has been supported by various agencies, including the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship, the National Science Foundation, the Wenner-Gren Foundation for Anthropological Research, the National Collegiate Athletic Association, and the Knight Commission on Intercollegiate Athletics. Alexis Ligon Holloway is a cultural anthropology PhD candidate and Dean's Graduate Fellow at Duke University. Lexi is an incoming 2024 postdoctoral fellow and visiting lecturer at Mount Holyoke College. Stemming from personal experience, her research explores how the mechanisms of white supremacy operate in classical music performance, examining how racial and aesthetic hierarchies position Black bodies as aberrant in these spaces. Specifically, Lexi's research centers on the resilience that Black musicians display in the face of racism in classical music pedagogy and performance. Dr. Brendane A. Tynes is a Sawyer Mellon postdoctoral fellow at Rutgers University and a fellow in peer review for the Wenner-Gren Foundation. Her scholarship centers on the experiences of Black women, girls, and queer and trans people at the intersection of critical Black feminist cultural theory, trauma and affect studies, and anthropology. Her doctoral research studied the effective responses of Black women and girls to multiple forms of violence within the movement for Black lives and was supported by the Ford Foundation, the CAETR Foundation, and the Wenner-Gren Foundation. Dr. Tynes brings an abolitionist, survivor-centered, Black queer feminist lens to her extensive experience as a workshop facilitator. Dr. Tynes' public scholarship includes the popular podcast Zora's Daughters, which she co-hosted, and her exciting new project, a spiritual political podcast, Black, Loved, and Free, which launches February 24th, if I'm correct. So y'all can go support that new exciting project. And last but not least, Dr. Lee D. Baker. Dr. Lee D. Baker is a professor of cultural anthropology, sociology, and African American studies at Duke University. He received his BS from Portland State University and doctorate in anthropology from Temple University. He's been a resident fellow at Harvard's W.E.B. Du Bois Institute, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, Johns Hopkins Institute for Global Studies, the University of Ghana Legon, the American Philosophical Society, and the National Humanities Center. His books include From Savage to Negro, Anthropology and the Construction of Race, 1896 to 1954, which we're here today to celebrate, Life in America, Identity and Everyday Experience, and Anthropology and the Racial Politics of Culture. Although he focuses on the history of anthropology, he has published numerous articles on such wide-ranging subjects as sociolinguistics, to race, and democracy. Baker is also the recipient of Richard K. Lublin Distinguished Teaching Award. He served as Dean of Academic Affairs from 2008 to 2016. He also received the President's Award from the ABA, and there are too many positions to count that he has served on. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Baker. I wanted to invite him to say a few words before we sort of get started.
Well, thank you so much. I am just privileged and honored, and particularly honored today because we had Bianca Williams and Tammy Navarro do a special talk about their 10-year anniversary of their important work about sitting on the kitchen table and kind of critiquing the academy and being a woman of color in the academy. So it was a great ABA again, sort of celebration, making things full circle. Alexa Holloway and Doobie Topakon was the interlocutors. So sort of generations of students that were sort of working. And I think, you know, from Savage to Negro just points to a whole number of things, but one thing I am very, very sort of pleased with, and I think Bianca was saying this, you know, you gotta be, you know, just be happy with what you have and what you have done, is that, you know, some of my students have gone on and just done amazing things. You know, some of our first Charlie sitting here, Marla Frederick and John Jackson are like running the world in the academy. But hopefully it's because we've instilled a sense of service and care and understanding that, you know, teaching, research, and service all come together in a way that, like what Faye Harrison taught me, we just have to refuse to choose. Like, you just can't choose, like, what's gonna be the heavy foot? Like, are we gonna spend more time teaching, less time doing research, more time doing service? You just kind of like keep going forward. Also, I have to give a special shout out to Brenda, Bianca, and Tracie, because they were my undergraduate students. And so I think we're all feeling the age of things. But and so it's just amazing to see, you know, how folks grow over this, almost, you know, almost a generation now. So I'm very pleased with that. So I also wanted to say a little bit about From Savage to Negro. It was the book that I needed as an undergraduate. So I wrote the book that, you know, someone who's pursuing at Portland State. Oh, before that, I want to say thanks to all the panelists and give a special shout out to my mother, Nancy Tolan, who is in here somewhere, and my daughter, Ya Baker, and my wife, Sabrina Thomas, would be here, but she's on an artist residency in Cuba and enjoying her time there. And I also saw some of my Macon family is in the house, so shout out to you as well. But I wanted to, so I wrote the book I wanted to read as an undergraduate because I was very interested in anthropology and African-American studies and the intersection of what was happening at Columbia during the Harlem Renaissance. That was the question. I mean, it was like, why is Boaz talking about all this race stuff in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance, basically in Harlem? But no one looked at Morningside Heights as Harlem or the influences of people like Zora Neale Hurston and Arthur Fawcett and a number of other anthropologists who were doing important work at that time. And this, you guys have to, this was like, it was published in 98, but the research was done in like 92, 94, 95. So we didn't have the internet. We had email, we had dial-up, but we did not have the internet as we know it. But what we did have, and this was the key, I was thinking last night, we were talking over dinner, it's like, how did you like figure that out without the internet? There's a lot of citation stuff, but Alan Locke's The New Negro, this is my copy that's all like losing its pages. I went back and everything's in here. Zora Neale Hurston, oh, well, her fiction is there, but then you go to Cudjoe Lewis, well, that was Zora. Like, no one's really picked that up. I mean, so it's Cudjoe Lewis doing his folklore, it's Arthur Fawcett, but then it's got the sociologist there, it's, you know, the Black middle class of Durham, which those families are still running Durham today, by the way. And then I'd go, well, Boaz wasn't in here, except if you go back to the bibliography and you look at, oh, that is where all of the Journal of American Folklore it was. And it's Elsie Clues Parsons, Elsie Clues Parsons, Elsie Clues Newell, all of these folklorists that contributed to Alan Locke's New Negro, as well as the sociologists. And you get Herskovitz there, but he's saying that Negroes are American. So he eventually flips, but I was able to piece all of this together, basically using this as a codex or like a key, because even though Zora was there, Alan Locke was there, a whole range of Arthur Fawcett, a whole range of both sociologists, artists, and the like, and that influence one could deduce is through the Journal of American Folklore and its large presence in Alan Locke's The New Negro. So I didn't write that in my sort of piece, but reflecting back about it, picking that apart and seeing where the anthropology was in the Harlem Renaissance was an empirical finding. I mean, it's not that hard, just I was the one who did it. The other thing is, we were talking about students and sort of the risk of writing what you want to do, just write it. But it was, like I said in my thing, I called it the gamble or the game, reflecting on writing from Savage to Negro. It was a huge gamble, but I kind of didn't care. I was like, if I was gonna learn, literally, I learned how to write during writing my dissertation and then the book. If I was going to learn how to do this sort of research, I had to be so motivated and interested in it that I knew if I was just doing something to get a job, I'd never finish anyway. So it was sort of like, let's roll the dice. And I had some computer skills. I knew I could, I kind of had the confidence that I could get a job outside of the academy anyway, because I did a lot of research as an undergrad. I had good connections and had internships at IBM. And I just had something to kind of fall back on. I thought to myself, if this grad student stuff doesn't work, I'm gonna be okay. And that confidence itself enabled me to write the book that I thought was super important, as Tracie, I think, said, the only book I even taught in my class. So I think it was that important that we're gonna just say. So I'm gonna say that the gamble totally paid off, but also the enthusiasm and I think the passion that goes in it is maintaining its livelihood today, because my second book is so much better written. I mean, and it's so much better research, but it's still 1/10 of what Savage and Negro. I don't know what to do with that. But it's had an impact that I guess maybe it resonated with those people that are interested in African American studies and anthropology. And I also say, it was an anthropology that I wanted not to burn. I thought, maybe if we can critique it well enough and see where there was legitimate, authentic, influential contribution from the Harlem Renaissance on that turn of anthropology from scientific racism to cultural relativity, although we know Boaz was more into amalgamation than he was integration, but that's something that's for the next book, hopefully. But nevertheless, there was, authentic, important, and influential work that shifted anthropology in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, that then shifted anthropology for the balance of the century. And then you could see it bookend in 1896 with Plessy versus Brown, 1954, and with the Brown decision. 58 years, that's as old as I am. It ain't that long. I just thought that, yeah, it's long, maybe it's really long, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, I just want to say how privileged, honored, and thank you so much for doing this symposium and recognizing the work, which I did hope that that was my motivation, was to sort of change people's understanding and make a contribution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Baker. Yeah, the book is a gift, and it's such an important contribution to the education of so many people, and it's so accessible that across disciplines, I think there's so much value in it. I wanted to pose the first question to the panelists. So all of you reflected on the importance of Dr. Baker's work in the special issue, but for those of us who haven't read the special issue, I would love it if you could sort of share your connection to Dr. Baker and how the book itself has shaped your teaching, your scholarship, whatever it is you want to share, but to help folks sort of understand your various connections to Dr. Baker. And I'm going to start with Dr. Williams, and then y'all can pass to the next person.
I knew you were
gonna Oh, there's a bit of an echo there, I think.
Sorry, did I not have my volume down? So I'm excited to talk about Baker. I just finished talking about Baker. An hour and a half of the conversation, but I will continue the theme. So I'm sure folks are gonna say plenty about From Savage to Negro. I literally just taught it last week or 2 weeks ago. Baker was in my class, Zoomed in my class at Bowdoin College to talk about the book. And I mean, it has over 1,000 citations, y'all, like 1,000. So it continues to be super relevant, and the way that I normally teach it is as a introduction, particularly for undergrads who have never, like, in my class, I have one anthropology major out of the 10. And so that's the book that I teach to kind of introduce them to the discipline, to introduce them to the significance of the concept of race in anthropology. And what I love about the book and what always stuck with me and inspires me about the book is the centering of Black folks, like the centering of Black folks and the role that we have played both in anthropology, but like outside of anthropology as a force, like keeping anthropology in check. The way that, you know, the artists and scholars from the Harlem Renaissance were doing. So anyway, I teach the book repeatedly because I think it's a essential text for understanding Black folks' place in this discipline. But beyond the book, I mean, again, Baker has been my mentor, advisor for over 20 plus years. So what, like, my connection to Baker is thinking about the ways that he was the one who introduced me to Black feminist anthropology. He's the one who introduced me to Zora and Irma and Faye, and it was in his class where I got the kind of, to see myself, to see the possibility of who I could be within the discipline, and using the tools from a variety of spaces. That's how I got introduced to it. Baker always respected, and I see this with his students through, you know, all the ones that I am connected to here. He takes us on our own terms. So it's like, the stuff that I was studying white kids and hip hop when I first came into graduate school, drastically different than the first book, if y'all don't recognize. I ended up with Black women and like happiness and diaspora. But even when I was doing that project, and at the time it was like a somewhat, you know, contentious thing to study hip hop, he took me on my own terms. He saw the potential gems and the gift of that work. And he didn't make me feel insecure about wanting to do that work. And I think that's not only about his personality, but about his like practice around mentoring and service. Because folks modeled it for him and he continues to model it for us, that like centering service and mentoring as our anthropological practice, the way that we make institutions, the way that we form horizontal relationships, the way that we form community is central to how we do the work. And I got that from watching Baker do his work. And the last thing I'll say, he has recruited a ton of people into, clearly, like, do you see Tracie, Lexi, Brendane, like, we're all here. Most of us in this room, because he brought us in. And I watch him at AAA and at ABA. I watch students who feel insecure or questioning or like, just like, why am I here? Like, I watch him help them make sense of what their possibility, what their contributions can be. And so even if he's not their mentor, like, he really does a great job at recruiting folks into either this discipline or the academy, or just doing great work using these tools. He does a great job of it. So he's generous, he's strategic, he allows us to understand the politics of what's happening when they're invisibilized or kept away from us. All of that kind of making things transparent is part of his work. And I'm grateful. Looking at that special issue, what I saw for the first time that I don't know why I hadn't seen it before, but he has a whole branch of Black feminist anthropologists that he has trained, multiple generations. And I learned when he came to my class that he does identify as a feminist. I didn't know that before. But regardless of like having that label or not, or carrying that label, like, his praxis has made room and space for a lot of us, has contributed resources to a lot of us, and he's fought for us both like behind closed doors and in public, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, sorry. Tracie.
Oh, across the table. Hi, my name is Tracie. I will piggyback off of what Bianca said and say that in my piece I wrote the way, like, what she's describing, Lee has said to me that that's him being our lineman. As we are all moving through the academy, and he uses that metaphor for me because I write about football.
Mine was hip hop. He said he was my producer.
Yes.
Oh,
He loves the metaphor. Lee Baker loves a metaphor. And it's always tailored to the person that he's talking to. So you see the differences here. But he has used that metaphor for me because I am one of his undergraduate students. And in the piece that I wrote, I said I became a cultural anthropologist because of Lady Baker. And part of the reason I chose this discipline is because I wanted to write a book like From Savage to Negro. And I think for me, that's a really important thing, like currently, like today in my life, because I'm working on my first book and finishing up my first book. And I'm highly motivated by not only the way that Lee wrote the book, the care with which he wrote it, the accessibility with which he wrote it, the fact that it is so heavily cited, which means that tons of people can read it and can understand what he's talking about. I think that that's really important. But also just the way that he's talking about certain ideas in the book, right? And so one of the things that I wrote in my contribution to the special issue is the fact that I think a lot about public audiences, and the way that I want to write what I'm doing, who I want to talk to, who I want to be in conversation with, who I want to bring into the conversation as I'm writing through citation. And all of that started with me reading Lee's book because it was the only book that he assigned in the class that he taught. Here I do. And I thought it was such a G move for him to just put his own book on the syllabus because he was like, yeah, this is all we're gonna need. And everything is here. And we did read the whole book through the class. We are all just like giggling in this room. But we did read the whole book in the class. But I think that that's a really important, I think it's really important, clearly one, that the book was that significant. But also to be able to go through each section of the book to see the way that he was making these arguments, as Bianca said, centering Black people, but like what he was talking about in doing that, right? And in a way holding anthropology to task, right? Like, and I think that that's also a really important thing as we're thinking about, he referenced like letting the discipline burn, like wherever you fit on that. Recognizing that anthropology is useful, but anthropology could do some soul searching, right? And that we could be part of the people that allow for that change to happen, if that's what we want. And so I got all of that in my sophomore year as an undergraduate at Duke by reading this book, by taking classes with Lee, by him being my advisor. And then eventually, if you do read the rest of what I contributed, I ended up working for Lee the year after I graduated. He was a member of my dissertation committee, even though I didn't go to Duke for grad school. And I've now come full circle and I'm back at Duke as a faculty member. And so he has been like the through line of my career. And he is quite literally the only reason I'm an anthropologist. He introduced me to the discipline. He encouraged me to go to grad school, even though I had no idea what that was. He told me that like research was a thing and that the things that I was interested in could count as research on our side. Because that was all stuff that was completely foreign to me. And so there's only one way that I'm here, and it's because of him. And so I think that it is really important to recognize like so many Black women have come through this department and either as undergrads or as grad students. And a lot of that has to do with Lee and the care that he shows his students. And the interest that he has in us and in our projects and wanting us to succeed and helping us do that, and acting as our lineman as we go through this process. So I will end there and pick it up with Lexi in the room here beside me.
Yep, passing it through the room. So Lee is my mentor, he is my advisor, he is my chair, he is sort of everything. And largely the reason why I came to Duke in the first place. So in my undergrad, I've talked about this before, but in my undergraduate education, I didn't read a single Black anthropologist in my 4 years at my undergraduate institution. The first Black anthropologist I read was John Jackson, and I went and visited him when I was applying, and he was like, well, have you thought about the Du Boisian anthropology that Lee Baker talks about? And I said, yes, even though I had no idea what he was talking about. So that was like my entry point. Thank you, John, if you're here. And if not, thank you anyway. I immediately just booked it over to Lee's Savannah Negro, and I was just absolutely fascinated and enraptured. And it also, the way that you tie Du Bois to Boaz makes it actually ridiculous for folks to gatekeep anthropology from Black communities. The Du Boisian approach is so sensible, it makes sense, and it also makes legible the work that we've been doing in and outside of the academy for decades. So that was largely that. In terms of mentorship, Lee is the reason why I've met everyone in this Zoom meeting, essentially. He introduced me and Tracie and Brendan during the lockdown via Zoom. The first book that we had in our our Black anthropology course, my first year here, we read Bianca's book first, and she came and visited our class, and we got to talk to her. I met Dr. Louis, I met Bert through Lee via ABA. I met Rashay, who is also another amazing mentor of mine through Lee. So Lee is, as it's been noted, and as it is said, is so extremely intentional about building community and uplifting Black feminist anthropologists. He has, again, such a huge sort of family tree, and he's so intentional about that. He introduced me to Faye Harrison and was like, "This is your grand mentee," you know? So he's very much about, like, intentional about these relationships and about this community building. And again, also giving light to topics that may not initially seem legible within the discipline. So my research has been questioned by so many people, and Lee is not one of them. He gave me the language to talk about it in an anthropological sense, but he saw the potential there when I came in being like, I just figured out what Du Boisian anthropology is and I really like it. So thank you to Lee. I'm just very much echoing all of the sentiments here, and I'm gonna pass it to Bert.
Thanks, Lexi. I haven't been as fortunate, to be part of this family tree. I'm so jealous. I'm just stewing over here. I'm not part of that, But seriously though, my entree to like Lee's work was when I was doing my master's degree in anthropology at the New School for Social Research. That's what it was called back then. And he came to visit. He came to visit and talked about Daniel Brinton, one of these, these figures that Lee talks about, from Savage to Negro. At the New School, we didn't have any, Black anthropology professors. And it was just nice as a graduate student to, just hear him talk about those different topics and stuff. I'll be honest, I've always been kind of intimidated by Lee, and I've always been like afraid to like go up to him and talk to him and stuff. So like, it really, honestly, it's only until I became like really like ABA president-elect that we started having a relationship and started talking to each other regularly and stuff. And as a result of that, it was he's really pulled me into an important world, and he's also kind of like this like Black male anthropologist model that I've had, which is really important to me, because he's a race man. He is someone who uplifts the Black race. The book From Savage to Negro is subversively, it shows how how the African diaspora has been pathologized by anthropology, and also that kind of like the historical trajectory along that, and that anthropology wasn't some sort of kind of like obscure science or discipline that had no effect on public opinion, and when in fact some of the line of reasoning mirrored some of the Supreme Court decisions like Plessy versus Ferguson and other decisions as well. So for me, I enjoy using the text to kind of introduce a lot of students to that this history that's kind of hidden in anthropology. Because what's interesting about like anthropology, like if you're like an undergrad and your first class is like an intro to cultural anthropology course, it's you don't learn necessarily this history unless it's being taught by maybe a Black anthropologist or some instructor who's been informed by this knowledge, which is still unfortunately not as central to the discipline as it should be, in my opinion. But yeah, I think just kind of like just to wrap up, I also appreciate Lee's mentoring as well, especially like in the background. There's a lot of stuff that he does in the background that people don't see, and he's also modeled for me like how to talk to like white people of authority. You speak unflinchingly, and you stand on business. You are just really someone who just like you just have to be brave and courageous, and just not care about what the consequences are and stuff. And as a result of that type of ethos, he was an instrumental player in us ABA, the Association of Black Anthropologists, moving transforming anthropology from this anthro suite widely, suite of journals to the University of Chicago Press when it came down to having conversations with people that, in the hierarchies of, of the AAA. So I always appreciate that about Lee. But yeah, I mean, all of this is part of the reason why, as outgoing ABA president, one, I wanted to center service and spotlight service and show how important service is to, the functioning of Black institutions. When you have good, strong leadership and people who are giving to Black institutions, such as the Association of Black Anthropologists, things are going to go very well. And Lee's been a model of that. He's basically worn every hat within the Association of Black Anthropologists. He's been president, editor, secretary treasurer, and other and probably other things that I'm not even talking about. So it was for me, once I created this ABA Presidential Service Award, it was only natural for me to name it after him, because he deserves that, because he's modeled that, the service as leadership so well for so many years that it just needs to be recognized. So I'm just so happy, to be taking part in this celebration for him, especially with regards to this fantastic text. So thank you, Lee. Thank you for everything you do and being a fantastic mentor. And I'll just pass this to Brendane.
Hi, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I am Brendane. I use she, her pronouns. And I met Lee Baker when he was Dean Baker in that mysterious period of time where he was wearing suits every day, suits and bow ties every day. And I met him as a pre-med student. I had all of the limited vision and dream to become a pediatrician when I came to Duke University in 2011. And I took anthropology of race with Lee when I was 19 years old, and it changed me and it changed the way that I saw the world. And I was like, okay, maybe this science stuff is cool, this biology stuff is cool, this pre-med stuff is cool, but maybe anthropology is a space where I can be seen and can see the world and can change the world. And I really appreciate what you said, Bianca, about Lee taking us on our own terms, because I'm not exactly sure he will let you know what he thinks about you, I think, when he feels safe to do that. But when we first met, I didn't know how Lee Baker really saw me as this young Black girl who was trying to do activism, trying to figure out how to use anthropology in a way that would actually change campus, getting involved in political justice work. And particularly since he was the dean, right? And part of his job was to kind of keep an eye on students who are doing that. But I know Lee Baker, primarily, there's a joke that I tell people is that I kind of bullied him into being a part of my life. And I don't know if you remember this, Lee, but it was like the 50th anniversary of Black students at Duke. And I saw you there at the celebration, and I was like, oh, hey, Dean Baker. And you were like, oh, hey, how things are going after graduation. And at that point, I had just finished taking your class. So I was like, Dean Baker, I was in your class last semester. What do you mean? And you literally walked away and came back to me and said, oh, hey, Brendane, how are you? And shook my hand. It's like, how are classes going? And and that was the beginning of our relationship with each other. And I honestly would have never thought to even name you or ask you to be a mentor. You kind of wrote me an email saying, as your mentor, I recommend that you do this. And that is how I became one of your mentees. And I'm so incredibly just grateful and thankful. And I would not be in anthropology without you, which is the story I think of so many of us who come to this discipline and who come through Duke, for sure. And I would not have seen a place for myself, my Black feminist self there, if I hadn't been one of your students. So thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for responding to that and sharing. And it's so beautiful to see the connections and the support that Dr. Baker has cultivated. I guess one of the things that I wanted to ask, after while reading the book, you really get the sense of these networked relations, these sort of connections, and how that really shaped the field. And I was really interested in how we might like historicize this moment and how the school, like we see like a school coming out of Duke. Like y'all are part of this, like you talked about a family tree, this genealogy. And I think Dr. Baker really like shows that in From Savage to Negro, we really see those sort of connections. So the question I wanted to pose, and you all can maybe jump in, whoever wants to speak to this, but how might we historicize this moment, the network around Duke and the 25 years since publication? I'm just really curious about how we might talk about this right now.
Well, I'd like to also say, you know, I've had more than a few men students, it seems like everybody, but they go on to industry and make a whole bunch of money, like pretty much, that they don't go into the academy. So and we've got several good examples like Giles and Micah and a number of other folks, but, so I think I would like to sort of say, you know, doing research. So I went to Portland State. William A. Little was a great mentor of mine. He also kind of showed me how like paradigms began, and he was very Afrocentric and Malifi Asante. He knew, picked up the phone. I went to Temple in anthropology, but just down the hall from Malifi's shop. But then studying history of science in paradigm shifts and all, you know, you start studying, particularly when you are in the archives, reading people's letters to other people. Like, that's how you do it. And you begin to see, you know, these sort of networks emerge. And again, this was microfilm. So what we have now today is so much easier. But Carter G. Woodson had a robust correspondence with Boaz that really paid Zora Neale Hurston for her first field trip. Like no one knew that unless you like did the archival work. And so I saw how these mostly men, but Elsie Clues Parsons was a big part of that, supported other scholars. And so from my mentorship, I saw it also in the archive. I said, I guess this is how you do it. And you know, you start reading Du Bois and Bus. These people were machines. Like getting tired, not an option. Like work-life balance, I don't know what they did. They were writing all the time. And so I just thought, well, I guess this is just how you become a scholar, sort of being modeled even after, you know, some of these greats. Zora Neale Hurston herself wrote a lot, both in their correspondence as well as their research. So to me, I just kind of thought, well, this is what you do. You work with people, you support people, you continuously do service. And service, not to put a line on your resume, but in order to support the next generation. And you don't learn this until you're 58 years old. It's the ultimate Ponzi scheme. Because Bianca's now doing it. And I see Chelsea Carter and she's like, you're my intellectual grade. We even have our full professor colleague, Jasmine Cobb, in this department was John's student. It's like, what's that? I mean, and so this whole reproduction of an intellectual project and praxis, I think, is something you don't really recognize. Like when I was mentoring Marla, when Charlie and I were both mentoring Marla, we didn't see the long-term implication of this because you just don't know. Then the next one comes, and the next one comes, you just keep working it out. But then the people take time and do the same thing. So, you know, all of you are, you know, passing it on along or whatever it's called. Passing it on, passing along, you know, reproducing those networks. Which comes, and I want to also give a big shout out to Faye Harrison and Michael Blakely, who really took me under their shoe. And Kamala was there too. So there was these kind of weird little generations that there was nobody. It was like me and Kamala. And then we then went and then jumped around. So it's sort of an interesting cohort effect. But at that time, there were very few anthropologists, and the ones that were there didn't really stay. I think that's a whole story that is worth looking at.
I was just gonna say, as someone, so even though I was the only Black person in my cohort, I had people ahead of me to look at. So like Kaifa Rowland was 2 or 3 years ahead of me, and then ahead of Kaifa was Marla. And again, like we all were brought in to practice a particular way, so they were immediately generous and looking behind them to kind of, you know, give a hug when necessary. The other thing that's happening during that time is that UT Austin has a huge critical mass of Black anthropologists during that time being trained in this activist anthropology, right? And yeah, there's a whole host of people, I can't even name all those folks who are coming through that, who for a variety of reasons, don't have a deep relationship with the anthropology department, but in the African diaspora studies department, right? And so to Savannah, your question around historicizing it, I remember looking at that department and being like, oh my gosh, like they're doing this amazing work. There's like theory and praxis, like all together, and they have this huge family tree. And I did know at the time that, you know, having John, Deb, and Baker in one department as anthropologists was probably the second most like a critical mass of Black anthropologists. And that allowed for there to be a type of work and allowed for Giles and Micah and me and like a whole bunch of people to kind of get through and create community. But we didn't have a name for that, right? Like it was Baker. like there wasn't like, that's activist anthropology, or that's, you know, like there's a whole set of terms and names and label like around UT Austin, that community, but it was his kind of intentional, you know, so when I historicize it in my head, I can see like Duke and UT Austin really feeding the discipline of anthropology, particular ideas about Black folks, Black peoples diasporically and transnationally, and doing that work at the same time. And those parallel contributions mean that it made room for, you know, the rest of the next generation. And I see it just through who my peers are now and who is still in the academy, who's outside the academy doing amazing work. Like those two things were happening at the same time.
But also the ultimate Ponzi scheme.
I don't believe in this Ponzi scheme. But okay, go ahead.
Is that now, talk about full circle, Marla Frederick is the mentor of my daughter, Ya, who I think is on, give her a shout out to Ya, who's on the call. And so that's kind of, you know, like you put in, you know, get out, and then you guys are working out and keeping track of her and stuff. So maybe it's not Ponzi scheme, but what it's like you give back, it's a ladder of some sort.
Yes, and as some, like, I want to be very intentional around this because I think sometimes people think that these are only about interpersonal relationships. Those things change institutions. These relationships, these community kind of connections. John is freaking dean of provost. Oh my gosh, like yeah, provost. Marla is dean of, you know, the divinity school at Harvard. And again, the practice of creating community. And as someone who is skeptical sometimes about the type of work that we can do in those positions, because, you know, the institutions, but those practices and those connections and our anthropological tools, our ethnographic tools can do certain type of work. And so I want to highlight the interpersonal work Baker is doing, but I see it, I pay attention, it's institution building and it's program building, and it changes how different spaces feel, but it also changes the type of work we're able to do. And then the generational work, it crosses time and space. So I just want to say that.
It also crosses, sorry, Tracy, it also crosses disciplines in sub-disciplines of anthropology too, because, you know, there are folks like Arlene Davila who's like, I love Lily, and she is extremely generous, you know. Yeah, Stan, I hope I'm not butchering his name, Stan Thangaraj at Stonehill, thank you, College, who is also extremely generous and who also loves Lee. So I think like Lee does this sort of, it's not, you know, Bianca, you talked about this earlier, it's not just vertical mentorship, it's also horizontal, and that creates this beautiful umbrella where people are trying to change this institution that's extremely violent, the institution of academia and then the sub-institution of anthropology. So it does have this I don't want to say trickle down because it's not a thing, but it has a spreading effect. It's not a positive. But it has this effect where it spreads, like this positivity and this mentorship and this, again, service spreads to these other corners of anthropology.
How about compounding?
We'll do
Well,
that.
And that's a better one. And to historicize that moment, AAA African American studies and African studies here and anthropology. I mean, the amount of anthropologists that have been also in AAAS, like there's something there. So in the same way that Baker's book is bringing together, you know, different disciplines and the variety of type of like Black studies work that's happening. That's not only scholarship, the different type of Black studies work that's happening here in that moment too, that AAAS and anthropology are working together.
Can I add something?
Absolutely.
This is Charlie. he's
Not
not
to,
on.
this is
Camera.
Charlie Pio, not to take away from Lee at all, but we have to add Carla Holloway into this
Oh, yeah.
mix. If you're talking about Duke, she was dean here. She was responsible for John and Deb coming.
That's true.
When Ann was chair at the time, and we wanted to hire one of them, we didn't know they were
Right.
together at the time. And Carla, we talked Carla into hiring both, and she hired both of them.
That's true.
And so all of a sudden, we've got John and Deb and you. Carla brought Marla to us, remember?
Right.
Marla was here as a summer student. Carla consolidated AAAS. And then you've got to add Duke Press, as you said earlier, into the mix. Ken Lissiker has been amazing at publishing, especially Black women. I mean, he's amazing across the board. But there's a whole sort of constellation of things that add up. And then, yeah, Lee has been driving this train for years.
That's a
Anyway.
good point, yeah. Carl Holloway was big. And then Mark Anthony Neal's part of that as well, who's on your committee, and
Bio Hosley.
Bia Holsey, Anne Maria Kulu.
A whole bunch of folks, but we don't wanna make this a Duke thing. I know y'all want to talk about.
And that's what I wanted to add to this is because I am part of the Duke, I guess, the genealogy from undergrad, but I didn't go to grad school here, right? And so like I'm a little out from that. And something that I just want to say though is that like I don't think this is Duke specific, right? Because like from being mentored by Lee, I took the way that he mentored me into grad school, right? And so the connections that I have from grad school, yeah, I was still connected with Duke, and that's how I met Lexi, and also like Brendane didn't go to grad school at Duke either. So it's like there's ways that we were trained to interact with other people, to find community, to be in community, to support each other across institutions, usually because we needed to, because that support was not at our own institution itself. And all of that I got from Lee and from Duke, right? And so even if you're not part of the exact genealogy, that's still stuff that I think we can all take with us, and we often do, right? Like because if we're historicizing any moment, I've done work with the edited volume of second generation of African American pioneers in anthropology, right? And the thing that mostly came out of the work that I was doing with that is Black anthropologists have been doing this for, like since there were Black anthropologists, right? Like this is not,
Drake.
right, exactly. And if you look at, I mean, even who was writing those chapters in that book about the second generation of anthropologists, right? Like that was a particular generation of anthropologists as well, which is how I met some of the people that are on this call now. And so I think it's just to reiterate that this is something that Black anthropologists have done since we were allowed to, and I mean that very deliberate, right? Like since we were allowed to be anthropologists, it's a way that we have navigated these spaces if we stay in the academy or if we don't. And so these connections are not just, they're not just site specific, right? Like it's not just Duke and UT, even though they are very prominent sites for this. It is happening everywhere. And that's also something that I think that we should take with us and also move forward with, right? Like continue to do that work, not that we are gonna stop, but continue to do that work because that's how we have remained in this discipline as long as we have. And I think that's another question too of like whether or not we want to stay, but that could be another question for a different day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tracie. Does anyone else want to jump in on that? I also realize we're like timing wise. I don't know if I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but also it's very exciting that everyone is here. Do we want to open up for like a question or so from people who are viewing or want to use a Q&A, or do any of the panelists or does Dr. Baker want to ask a question? Just want to put it out there. What do we want to do?
Baker's always gonna ask a question if you have questions for Baker. So I would say folks who are attending, if you have a question, can you put, in the chat or raise your hand? I see your hand is raised.
Okay, a hand raised. Let's see here. I'm gonna let this person talk. Jamal. Okay, here you go. Hi, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. First off, what an amazing panel. This is awesome. Thank you all for taking the time and talking about this. My question is about the idea of the future of especially Black anthropology and anthropology in particular. You talked a lot about the intergenerational kind of groupings and the progress that's been made so far. But now, as we can see here on this panel, there's this emergent generation of Black scholars who are continuing the work, building on the foundation that's been set by your work, Dr. Baker. I wonder, what are your thoughts about the future of anthropology, given the folks that you've been mentoring and building up?
That question is not for me.
No, he said the one that you have been
Exactly,
building up.
yes, you.
That's a Tracie
Oh,
Canada.
no, it's not true.
Can I jump in here? Can I jump in?
Sure,
Here?
please.
I think, the future of Black anthropology is in great hands. And we have folks who are strategically placed in so many great areas. We have folks who are at, the Winter Grin Foundation now. We have, Brendan, you're there, right? Yeah, so Brendan's there. Donna Austin is there as well. We have, Black feminist anthropology that's still leading the way as
Who's
far as
president?
huh?
Who's president?
Yes, yeah. And then we also have, these younger up and coming scholars like, Ashante Reese, who she deals with like, issues with regarding food. Justin Hosby, he's like, a leader when it comes to the paradigm of Black ecologies. So I still think we're just, we're still leading the way, and this is all an extension of ABA. ABA, as I've said before publicly, is like, I feel is like the conscience of the AAA. And it's, and to a further extent, I can extend that, I think, to the discipline. I think that Black anthropologists and the work that we do is, so important about like the type of, anthropology, how it should be done ethically. We should be against extractivism when we're doing our work. We need to be community oriented. And those are the things that we continue to do. And I think we'll continue to lead, not necessarily lead the discipline, but just continue to do our own thing. Continue to do what we, consider to be important work, regardless of your disciplinary background, whether it be linguistic, archaeological, cultural, physical anthropology. But yeah, we're good. We're good.
I would also like to say too, one of the things is I was like prepping for this, I reread everyone's essay, and I was like amazed at the fact that one, that Lee has a mission statement. I was like, okay, that is there, but also that you are one of the like few academics that I could say actually lives up to your mission statement, right? The way that you move through the world. And there was a tweet or X or whatever you want to call it now that was out that was talking about how there are so many senior scholars who are about service, who say, they have the kind of lip service around serving students, about building up students, but then don't actually show up. And one thing that I can say is throughout the 11 years that I've known Dr. Lee Baker is that he's shown up for me, even behind closed doors. And other people will come and tell me the ways that Lee Baker has advocated for me. And that is something that I treasure deeply. But just to say that as far as the future of the discipline and what I see is, as a young scholar who just got her PhD last year, I am wondering about this generation of Black feminist anthropologists, right? Who name themselves as Black feminist anthropologists or Black feminist scholars, who do not see the value in service, who do not see the value in actually building up a generation of people, and kind of the ways that younger anthropologists are kind of really searching for folks who will give them that guidance, who will give them that protection, who will give them that mentorship as they move through abusive institutions. And so I think part of what I see is the power of Lee's work, besides the ways that it demonstrates the power of studying Black people and centering Black people in anthropology, right? And what that opens up and allows us to critique, but also hold on to, is the model that he provides as service, and what actually shows us is what's necessary for our survival of this discipline, right? Because our elders are becoming elders. Our elders should be able to retire. Our elders shouldn't have to, continue to do all of these things, right? And so what I see also in your career is this kind of critique of a white supremacist model of scholarship, right? That says that the individual scholar, like my mentorship is the work I put out there, right? My mentorship is me showing up at panels, but it's actually, no, it's the work that you do with students each and every day that make them feel safe, that make them feel protected, that make them feel heard, that make them feel like they can carve their own way in anthropology and they don't have to be a mini you to be successful. And so I think that, I don't know, as a young scholar, like the fact that I don't see many folks in the generation like right above me who are really committing to that, it troubles me. It worries me. It makes me think that our elders are going to have to work past the time that they should. And so I think I would like charge the anthropologists who are here, who are like feeling like they don't need to serve or mentor others because you got your book or you got whatever, to really consider Lee Baker and Faye Harrison and Cheryl Rodriguez and others, right, as models of how we really carry this discipline forward and not just ourselves and our own work.
But I also want to sort of piggyback off of that, Brendane, and also suggest that our generation is very much set up to mentor. You know, if you think about you, me, Tracie, Chelsea, Sarah Bruno, those folks as being in a generation, like we've all had that care and love put into us as scholars. So I think even though there may be a gap ahead of us, hopefully not, but if there may be a gap ahead of us, I think the people below us and coming after us are probably covered. You know, Lee has mentored how many, like dozens and dozens and dozens of folks who are now out there. And if we all each do that same type of work of also providing care, providing space, providing time, providing kindness to the people who come after us, then what I really think that there will be echoes and there will be the ripple effect happening in the academy.
I can speak to that too, as just very new person in some ways to graduate school, that several people on this call have embodied that spirit that Lee has you know, shown and demonstrated. So y'all are doing it. Is all I can say. Did anyone else want to ask a question or pose anything? How are we feeling? We're over time, but we're doing okay.
I just want to finally give a shout out also to my sister Carla Smith, who's in there, and Ya's in there, my mom Nancy. So I'm feeling very, and I think Uncle Edward I saw. So thanks so much for my family for showing up.
Well, if you want your mom on here, I know that there were some requests from Dr. Williams to see your family. So I mean, I'm not putting anyone on the spot, but
I don't know.
But hi, family. Thank you for sharing him with us. He's taking great care of us. Thank you.
yeah, thank you everyone for joining today and for sharing. And it's such an amazing turnout, and it's great to see so many names on here. But just the fact that we were able to get all of you together on this call and to really celebrate this work and sort of reflect on, yeah, this intergenerational community. And I'm certainly grateful for being able to you know, see all of you and participate in this. So thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Baker, for all that you have done and that you continue to do. So yeah, thank you. And thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you all so much. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud. I'm really appreciating, I'm feeling very honored myself individually. But this was about the book, but it wasn't about the book. So what it is, it's about the community we instantiate together. So I may be a catalyst for a little bit of that, but it's a bunch of other connections and networks and layers. So I appreciate recognizing my branch in this overall, but it is, I mean, so I think what makes me so proud about this is that the book generates community and continues people sustain. And then it's all the behind the scenes stuff and invisible labor, right? Like you can't even, confidential and invisible labor. Like I can't even, I've been going up to people and saying, I hooked you up, cuz. To me, that's, anyway, form of resistance. But for many years, I didn't do that. I was like, gosh, I can't even tell them. and so, well, anyway, it's about the constitution of community and care and just trying to get through this. And now, you know, as I'm towards the end of my career, being able to see the impact and then the way other people's are taking that modeling, to me, that's what needs to be celebrated, not me individually, nor the book individually, but the community of care that we take forward as scholars in this crazy institution.
Awesome. We can celebrate all of that.
Yes,
All of
we
it.
can.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone. It's been an honor. And yeah, continue to support each other and carve out space for each other. Thank you.
Take care, y'all.
Take care.
Thanks, y'all.